think that masculinity has taught us that the only ones worthy of our friendship, that the only ones worthy of our time are other males who fit our definition of masculinity.
Yeah. So what do you think it means to be a good man? What
My name is Cristian Eduardo. I have been living in New York in the United States actually for 8 years. I am originally from Mexico, and I am a survivor of human trafficking. I am openly a gay male. I am a person living with HIV, and I have been doing a lot of advocacy for immigrants, LGBTQ plus rights, and it's interesting because in the intersection of all the work that I have been doing and my advocacy, always masculinity came out.
mm,
And I'm also doing a lot of work around prevention and education about gender-based violence. And it's one of the core topics about masculinity. How can we prevent? How can we educate males? How can we create a healing environment for males? How can we prevent abuse, violence? And it's always one of the main topics. So on Instagram, I'm constantly following like pages or sites that are talking about masculinity, like to learn more about like how other people perceive masculinity, and that's how I ended up finding you. And when I saw one of your posts, it was like, oh, someone is interested about it, and I was like, yes, I would like to participate about it. Beside all that part, like I'm also like studying mechanical engineering, and I think that on the STEAM field, I also see a lot of the topic of masculinity. So it's a constant. I think that in my life, even as a gay male, I've been part of the community. Like I think that also masculinity, it's a really big part of the community. It's constantly a topic that is coming out of my life. And I think that it's very important like, to have these spaces to have like this type of discussions about like how do we perceive masculinity, does it affect everyone, how affects everyone, and what we can do like to foster spaces for talking more about it.
for sure. Yeah. No, it pops up in so many different spaces, and I mean, thank you for sharing all the different ways that it weaves into your life. I would definitely be interested in hearing more about it because, like you said, it pops up in so many different ways for different spaces where we show up, whether it's work or personal life, or family background. So I'd be curious to hear. So one of the questions I always like to ask everyone is, what does masculinity mean to you, and where do you think you learned it from? And it can be from a bunch of different places, but it's always a good conversation starter for what it means to you, and the sources for where you learned it from.
Yes. So masculinity for me, I think that it's the value that we have for society, and especially because we need to recognize that we live in a patriarchal society. I think that within time we internalize and we think that we assume that it's a value that we have for ourselves. But one thing that I have seen in my personal life, and it's that masculinity is always tied about how others perceive me, like the way that I talk, the way that I walk, the way that I move, how many partners do I have, how much power do I have, how much money do I have. So I think that it's like how much how worthy am I for society is in this patriarchal society, and I learned it at a young age, to be honest, because I'm coming from Mexico, and Mexico, the family has like my family has very like strict rules around patriarchy, like don't talk in a certain voice tone, don't move your hands, like even when you're speaking, like don't move your hands much. That's not masculine enough. You need to like football. You need to like violence, aggression. You need to have like certain number of partners, and it's always about like power, money, and control. So I learned it from, I think that from my family, directly from my father, from my grandfather, and the interaction that they had to me. And I will challenge to say that I learned it. I will say that it was imposed on me.
Hmm, I see. And what what has been the process like? Are there pieces from that imposing that have been like impressed on you, or have you spent time kind of unlearning the pieces that didn't fit into your own life? What was that process like as you grew up from like family to being like an adult on your own?
Yes, so I think that masculinity, since I was a kid, it has been like a huge topic for me. From the Mexican, I think that patriarchal, I would say that the Latin perspective, as a kid, I never fit this masculine stereotype. Like I never like football. Like I think that for the view of the adults around me, my tone voice was different. Like I didn't really like to play with a lot of other males because always was like aggression and all these things. I prefer like to read books, like to pay attention to school, and this was seen as not masculine. So I always have like this connection between masculinity, and of course, there was always like a consequence, like you need to behave this way, or things like you cannot laugh out loud because that is not masculine. Like you cannot walk a certain way. Like you need to show that you are show your dominance, and it was always in my mind, even as a kid, like why am I always being forced like to interact with the world in a way that it's not natural for me, and like because I think that as a kid, like we interact with the world, like even if we have this constant pressure about like gender norms and how like our family is pressuring us like to interact with the world, we really interact with the world in a natural way, and it wasn't natural for me to interact it in a masculine way. So I was always reprehend. I was always like kind of afraid. I was like, it was this constant like, am I masculine enough? Like, am I doing enough? Like not being perceived like as different, as weird. Because this always open up like when you are not masculine enough, regardless of your sexuality, like this open up the door for you become like the joker. You become like the center of bullying. You become the everyone like I think that discharge their frustration in the person who is not masculine enough. So a lot of times that was happening to me, and I was like, okay, this is not only coming from my family, now it's coming from my classmates, it's coming from society and all these things. So I continue growing up, and I was like, but it's not natural to me like to try to adapt to it, and I try like to play sports, and I was like, well, I mean I can do it, but it's not something that it's clicking on me. It's not something that it's fitting on me. I really think that school was for me. I really like a school, but it was not something that it was high value for masculinity. Like I didn't have like, for example, a lot of partners during like secondary school or high school, and masculinity was always there. Like why you don't have partners? Like why you don't have a girlfriend? Like you should be like my dad and my uncles and my grandparents were like you should be like us, like always like having like million hundred of girlfriends, and like be like you always like being the dominant one. And I was like, why like if I don't feel that connection with someone, like why would I do it? Like or like I think that also there was this expectation that of me getting in fights, and I was never giving problems. So for them, like always like I was never like fitting their definition of masculinity. And
Hmm.
as I was growing up, it was always the same. But it was interesting because when I decide to be openly gay to my family, to society, something very interesting happened. So before, I wasn't masculine enough, and now that I became like openly gay, for a lot of the people that identify also as gay, and for the LGBTQ plus community, and for these spaces, these queer spaces, the feedback that I started receiving, it was like, but you don't look like gay. And I was like, wait. So now, okay, half of my life, I has been told that I'm not masculine enough. I thought that by looking for other spaces where like masculinity shouldn't be like the high priority. Now I'm finding that it is the high priority. Like still masculinity, it's one of the labels that is used, and is one of the tools that is used, like to continue labeling people and cataloging people just based on how they look and how they act. And so is this constant feedback even now as an adult. Like a lot of people, like when they when I interact with new people, usually and I disclose that I'm a gay male, always most of the time I receive this feedback like, but you don't look or you don't act gay. And I'm like, there's no gay acting. And for a lot of other people, like usually like it's usually on the straight places, very masculine spaces, the feedback that I receive is like, but you're not masculine enough. And it's like this contradictory of spaces. And it's like, okay, but that's what I was saying, that masculinity is not really something that it's tied to our personal value, but it's always tied to how society perceive our worthiness, our value. And it's always like that because we're always worried about, do I look masculine? Am I enough? Am I worthy? Do I have enough power? Do I have enough money? And is this constant? Because I think that the reality is that we have normalized it to a point that we allow bullying, that we allow like harming others. That I think that before, like years before, I remember that when I was a kid, nobody was discussing masculinity. So when I see spaces like this, it's great. And it's interesting because still I think that social media and all these places, it's like, let's discuss masculinity and all these things. But when you try to do it like in your community, in your family, people shy away. And it's like, wait, no, 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 no. You can do you. I'm going to stick with my masculinity. It's part of me. And it's like, well, no, we can discuss this as males. We can discuss this as community, because we haven't learned still how to discuss masculinity, how to disagree, how to start like educating ourselves, how to start like really going down deep in ourselves and be like, well, maybe because I was harmed when I was a kid, and this has been working for me. This has been protecting me and fitting the definition of masculinity, or what my family, society, like I learned in school has allowed me like to not being bullied, not being harmed, like to fit in society, like to give me a job, not being discriminated, feeling safe. Like, so I'm not going to change that. And I think that a lot of times we don't say these things because a lot of times I myself challenge a lot, like the role of males, masculinity, and all these things. And I think that in a lot of times in one-on-one conversation is great, but I think that when trying to implement it, people are like, you know what, yeah, it's great, but there is a lot of consequences. Not everyone is changing, so I'm not going to change. Probably I'm going to be more open with you. Yes, and I think that everyone is like crying. It's okay, and I think that it's perfect. Like I think that masculinity has affected us as males like so much that we are not even able like to recognize our emotions, and a lot of times this really escalates to the point that it becomes abuse violence towards really others around us, because we don't know how to recognize our emotions, how to interact with our emotions. And the only way that masculinity has taught us to do it, it's through abuse, violence, harming others. But the reality is that when a single male wants to change in society, there are huge consequences. It puts you in a very vulnerable state. I think that that's why it's very, very hard to still challenge the idea of masculinity, where it's coming from, and what can we do better, like to foster and have like these types of conversations.
Yeah, I mean, so much good content there, that and so many cool ideas that you've brought up. I mean, I think the first thing you mentioned is just that, like, the reason it's so important to be authentic is because you you can't please every environment, right? And so if you're constantly adjusting the level of masculinity, no one's ever going to be totally happy with how you present yourself. And so it was so interesting to hear you experience two different worlds, and find friction in each related to the masculinity. And so if you can't please everyone, you might as well just be authentic and happy with yourself. So
Yes.
I love that point. And the other thing you brought up, I've been reading about it actually, the patriarchal dividend. So like society paying dividends for masculine traits, and when guys see those benefits for like fitting in, or power, like you said, it can be very difficult to be, to go against that definition, and it takes so much strength. And you mentioned it's like a vulnerable position, and guys growing up may have seen other boys or men kind of punished for not displaying the right traits of characteristics, and that really can set a deep fear in. And that, I think that's what makes it so hard to have productive conversations about masculinity, because I think it can kind of, trigger that fear, right? Because if when you display, when you're in a conversation, if you're displaying vulnerability, I think it can harken back to like when you're younger and you may have seen someone bullied or called out, and that fear can stay with you. So I really appreciate that you brought that up and articulated it so well, because I think it's an important concept to understand. But now having these conversations, I think it's important to share that, like, no, talking about these kind of things and being vulnerable is coming actually from a place of strength, right?
Yes.
Being
Yes.
okay with, happy and authentic, connected to yourself in a position where you can actually share is a position of great strength. It's really the people yelling like, hey, shut up, like we can't talk about that, are the
Yes.
ones who haven't really arrived at that place yet, you know?
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. And I think that a lot of times when you don't really fit the definition of masculinity that each people have, that's where people make feel uncomfortable, and it's like, why are you not acting like my perception of masculinity? And the reality is that you're not doing anything wrong. It's like really a reflection of themselves. And yes, I will say that showing yourself vulnerable, it really takes a lot of strength, because it's recognizing that you are challenging not only like your core values, what you learn in your family, but also it's like recognizing that you're challenging a system, like this patriarchal system, that you're challenging society, but also that you are doing a lot of healing. I think that we need to understand that it's hard, it's very difficult to understand masculinity, how it affects us, because it comes from a chain of intergenerational trauma. Like our parents, grandparents, great grandparents have been dealing with this, and they haven't had like even spaces like to name it what is masculinity. Like it has been just going back and forth from there, and generation through generation through generation, until it arrived to us. And like making that shift and be like, okay, I'm going to be the agent of change. Like, of course, it's not going to be easy, but I think that is so healing, and it is so powerful, like to be comfortable with who you are without like being tied to what society think about you. Because at the same time that you're breaking this intergenerational trauma change, like you are healing yourself and you are allowing to feel. And the reality is that you see the change around you. For all the people who are like watching this video, you are not alone on challenging masculinity, and you are going to find people around that are doing the same. That's the reality. Like, and I feel that in the beginning it's very hard, because I think that we, as males, we live like in silos, like with certain ideas of masculinity, and once we break that idea, like we don't belong to that island, and it's like, okay, now I'm lost in the ocean. But there are more people like actually like navigating that ocean, and a lot of times there are people with boats already, that they are like, hey, hi, I'm actually like doing the same, like let's navigate together. So I think that it's very worthy. I think that it's healing, and it's not only about you, like it's about understanding that we can learn from one each other, and like have learning like that compassion, that love that it has been like a lot of times denied to ourselves since we were kids.
I love that analogy of the boat in the ocean. It's comforting, you know, that other people are out there in the ocean. The other thing you mentioned was like the healing it took to get to a place of like acceptance and like authenticity. I'm curious if you could share whether there were any tools that helped in the healing process, like self-care, or mental health resources, or finding community. Like, what was helpful for you, kind of, like you mentioned, the healing process to get into a place of like authenticity and like connection with yourself.
I think that it's learning to hear others. I think that one of the big tools that masculinity to us males to keep us like oppressed is like the disconnection with others. Like by stopping us to connect on an emotional level, by always centering us, putting us in the middle, forcing us to be like, I need to act a certain way. I need to always keep an eye on how people are perceiving me. We lost ourselves in that idea, and we forget that we can learn from others. So for me, it was like learning the different parts of my identities. Yes, being male is one part of my identity, but also like being Latino, like being Mexican, being an immigrant, being part of the LGBTQ plus community, like even being a gamer, like being I like manga and anime, like being an otaku, like, and get comfortable with like those part of you. Like I don't know, that I know a lot of males that is like, I like painting, but nobody knows about it. I like music, but nobody knows about it. I like, I don't know, like I like meditation, but nobody knows about it. And there are like so many things that we don't allow ourselves to connect with others. And also one of the big things that allowed me, it was like create community outside of my comfort zone around masculinity. I think that masculinity has taught us that the only ones worthy of our friendship, that the only ones worthy of our time are other males who fit our definition of masculinity. If someone doesn't fit your definition of masculinity, you don't become friends with them. You don't spend time with them. And when you came out of that comfort zone, actually, you start learning a lot. You start learning that everyone has struggles as you, that other people have feelings as you. And the reality is that you learn that other people, a lot of times, they express them. And it's interesting because by seeing them, you start learning how to express yourself. And you are like, oh, so this is not that bad. Like I work a lot with victims and survivors of gender-based violence, victims of domestic violence, intimate violence partners, and human trafficking. And contrary with what masculinity is always telling us that, oh, it's always woman, it's always girls. Well, actually, like there are a lot of survivors and victims of domestic violence, intimate violence partners, human trafficking, abuse, and violence that are males, and they never disclose because that definition of masculinity. If something happened to you, it's your own fault because you weren't strong enough, because you weren't able to protect yourself. So I think that really recognizing, getting connection with other communities, listening to other people, even if you get a lot of times angry, like, oh, I dislike that. Like it's things happen because people are weak. Like I think that self-reflection is a big part. It's like, where is this coming from? Why am I angry about like people expressing themselves? Like, how, is this affecting me? Like, not really, but why am I getting angry? And the other part is like really challenging yourself, where all these thoughts are coming from. And I think that that's very hard, especially if you're living with your family, especially again, if you're living in this island, like, because if 24/7 you're receiving the same message about masculinity, like it's very, very challenging. So like coming out of those spaces, like learning about what is masculinity, like what is the meaning of like patriarchy, things like this. It's very uncomfortable in the beginning because it's like, so that's mean that I have been harming people? Well, probably, very likely, and you need to come in terms with it. But on the other hand, like things that I do to like really challenge my masculinity, to be honest, is like try to get in connection with my emotions, knowing that there are more emotions than being happy, being proud, and being angry. There are like truly like a spectrum of emotions. There are more emotions beyond being angry and being dominant, to be honest. Self-care is very important. Self-care is not only like going take beers with your friends, like joking about it. Self-care is really time with you, to connect with you. It can be any activity that gives you like joy, pleasure, and that allows you to really deep connect with you, and also like give time to yourself. Like I'm pretty sure that all males, like we have been hurt so much that a lot of times we don't want to go down that rabbit hole. And but we need to, if we want to heal. I mean, if you broke your arm and it's bleeding, like you don't leave it there like bleeding and it's like, well, I'm just going to don't look and it's going to heal magically. Like that's never going to happen. Like, and I think that people need to understand that since kid we have been like hurt. Like we have like deep cuts that are still bleeding, just because we have been get to the pain, like we have get to the bleeding, like that doesn't mean that the harm is not happening. So I think that getting comfortable with yourself and acknowledging that, like when I was a kid and my dad told me that this wasn't masculine enough, that I wasn't male enough, when like things like this, that you need to talk with yourself and start creating this space. That I think that it's hard. To be honest, it's not something easy. It's not going to work at the first time. Also, I want to say, but it's very worthy, like to start doing that to yourself. And also, I always recommend like trying therapy or any other cultural practice that allow healing. Also, like hearing these kind of conversations and trying to talk also with other friends, trying to talk with women, with people from the LGBTQ plus community about it, learn from them, learn from one each other, because I think that there is value always in people who don't fit our definition of masculinity. I think that healing and learning are always around us, but our masculinity is always there to stop us from healing and to connect with others.
Yeah, no, it's such a good almost like a challenge to the viewers, where like if you encounter a version of masculinity that is different from one that you are comfortable with, instead of adopting a position of fear or anger, try and take it as a learning opportunity for yourself, for and try and make a connection with that person. So I think reframing that like
Yeah.
initial, because I think a lot of times it really just is that initial reaction of like, oh, that's different. And as soon as I've seen it before, like as soon as you just get beyond that initial reaction, you can make connections on things you're interested in together, commonalities, or even differences. Just it can be interesting learning about what's different about your background. So I love that, and it's a good prompt for the viewers to try and practice in their daily lives. I also, I mean, your work is incredibly important, helping survivors of sexual violence and trafficking. Like you said, especially masculinity in those spaces is so harmful for making progress in healing. So thank you for sharing that, and for the work you do there. It's so incredibly important, and it's an example. It's an extreme example of just how harmful feeling stuck and not being able to share is for healing. And things like self-care and connecting with yourself, and slowly working through things that may have been sources of trauma in the past is such hard work, but so necessary. And things like self-care that you mentioned can be really helpful in getting you along there. And like you said, if it's the metaphor of the broken arm, you doesn't looking away and just trying to push through. It doesn't. Sometimes you need some real attention to it to actually make it better. So I love the analogies, and I want to be cognizant of the time. I only took half an hour from you. But I want to say I would love to continue the conversation. I think this year in particular, I'm working on growing like a next concentric circle of fellow creators and people working in the space, and so would love to continue the conversation
Sure.
in the future. It was really, really amazing to meet you. And I always like to leave a few minutes at the end if there's anything you want to share, something you're working on, or just a message to people who might be listening, or whatever, a book, or music, whatever. If there's anything you want to share, I'd just like to open up the platform for anything you might have.
Yes, perfect. So for everyone who is listening, sometimes it's very hard as males to recognize that we have been victims of something. But if you have been in any point of your life, maybe as a kid, as an adolescent, or even as an adult, of sexual assault, domestic violence, or any other form of abuse and violence, including human trafficking, just I want you to know that there are resources, that there is people who is going to help you, to support you, that is not going to judge you, and that experience any form of abuse and violence is not going to change your value as a male. So looking for help is important. Looking for help is okay. And looking for healing also is okay. And you deserve to receive the support and the services. So there is always resources out there. I want to remind everyone that if you are thinking about suicide or harming yourself, 988 is always there for you. If you have an emergency, you can call 911, and there are some other resources that you can call if you are in a situation of abuse and violence. And males, we can also experience. We can experience abuse and violence. I was trafficked as an adult male. So I just want to share that with everyone. So it's not your fault. It's not because you weren't male enough. It's not because you weren't worthy enough. It's because we are human beings. Like the abusers were the ones who were perpetrating this harm. But you really deserve compassion, support, and the kindness, and it's totally okay to look out for support.
That is beautifully said. Thank you for sharing that. And it's just, sometimes I'm just overwhelmed because it's such a privilege to even have this platform. I mean, we were a tiny page, and then during COVID just blew up because men were looking for mental health resources online. And so it's really overwhelming just because that message that you just delivered is so powerful, and then thousands of guys will see it. And it's just amazing to be making that kind of impact. So I really thank you for sharing that. It's really an awesome contribution to make. So I really thank you for that. And if there are any resources in particular that you think would be useful to share, we have a page where we keep some resources just on our website that we've been building out. So
Okay.
If you have like links of organizations or hotlines that you think would be just related to that you think would be useful, I'll add it to our website so our followers can see. I think that could just help further the impact.
Yes, yes. No, and thank you. I think that you're all doing, to be honest, an amazing work. I think that it takes a lot of courage, to be honest, and strength, like to challenge and to have these conversations. And no, I'm very grateful that I'm having this conversation with you. Yes, like if I can contribute with anything, like I'm always open and happy, like to support one each other.
Amazing. Well, for sure, I would really appreciate any resources you can think of that we can put on the website. I would love to do that, and then just would love to continue the conversation in the future at some point. I'm sure there's a million things we could talk about, but it was so nice to meet you. And what's today, Friday? Yeah, I hope you have an amazing weekend.
You too, and have some self-care, okay?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Always take time.
Bye.
Bye. Nice to meet you. Bye. Bye. Yeah, so what do you think it means to be a good man?
I don't think there's a single definition. things that make up a good man are just the things that make up a good person.
Someone who's honest, someone who's decent.
You're also willing to express yourself in a healthy way, and you're in touch with your emotions as well.